homesteading, we've got our 2 worm farms, and we have our 22 chickens. And that's kind of what we are all about. I am on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Grow Messy. Grow Messy just means to start. Start messy, start somewhere, get in there and do the hard things, and just make it happen. So let's start by defining worm farming. On our little handout, we've got vermicomposting and vermiculture. Vermicomposting refers to the use of worms to convert waste material into a humus-rich soil additive or natural fertilizer. The byproduct of worm composting consisting of worm castings, microorganisms, and unprocessed organic material. Vermiculture is just simply the culture of worms. So raising, hatching, and breeding worms, which is kind of what I do. Why do I worm farm? I worm farm because it's really interesting to me. I had a friend that I follow on Instagram, and she had her greenhouses, and she got a whole big truckload of compost, and the compost was bad. It had been sprayed with like a bunch of chemicals, and it was killing all her plants that she put in it. And one way that she rectified the situation was worms. She put worms out, and the worms over time would turn all of that compost into a better compost by adding those microorganisms and good stuff back in her soil to be able to grow her healthy plants. It is very hands-off. You can set up your worm farm, you can check it once a week. You don't really need to do much to it until you're ready to harvest, and I will go over all of that as well. Some questions. What are your goals for worm farming? So some of my goals for worm farming are achieving worm castings, turning those worm castings into a worm tea, and also using the worm compost. And these can all be used in your garden, in your house plants, in your lawn, every plant you can think of. You can use it whenever you're planting initially. So what I like to do is I'll use the castings and I'll sprinkle a little bit of castings and then plant my plant in that hole. Or if it's already been planted, I can add it to the surface and then water it in. If I'm using the castings to make worm tea, I can spray all of my foliage and in my soil around. And I can also use it to my advantage as far as my plant starts. So I can add it to the water if I'm bottom watering my plant starts. It just adds those microorganisms, all the good stuff, the healthy stuff to help your plants grow big and strong and healthy and green. Some of the benefits of worm farming. Essential for healthier, richer soil, altering your soil structure, your dynamics, your plant growth, removing water. So when you have worms and they're making those little holes, I mean, that's your movement of water. And it's adding all of those good things back into your soil. They excrete waste or poop in the form of casts. Casts are a type of soil aggregate, which plays a big role in the soil as far as wind and water erosion. It also increases your microbial activity in the structure of your soil, and it helps plants absorb it quickly and easily. So types of composting worms. I have 2 different types of composting worms in my worm farms. I have red wigglers and I have the European night crawlers. The red wigglers are probably your best worm and most accessible. They can eat half their weight in food daily. They're very efficient at breaking down decaying organic matter. They're one of the most popular ones because they're most efficient at what they do. The European night crawlers is a cousin to the red wiggler, much larger than the red wiggler, and they can survive underwater for long periods of time. You can find them burrowing in compost piles or piles of manure. 2 other ones that I want to mention that I do not have are the red tiger and the blue worms. The blue worms are more of like a tropical region, so that's why, hence we don't have it in Texas. So where to get your worms? I got my worms from Mimi's Worms. And you can find this if you just type in composting worms in Google. It'll bring up a bunch of different places where you can get your worms. 2 of the most popular ones are Mimi's Worms and Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. They ship it to you right in a little box with little holes, and they are ready to go once you get them. They also sent me worm chow. This is just worm food that you can give your worms. It's extra. I wouldn't rely on it solely, and we'll go over that. But you can also make your own worm chow. You can go on Google and search recipes and you can make your own worm chow. So it just makes it a little bit easier, more cost effective on feeding your worms. If you don't like, say, cook from home a lot, and you don't have a lot of food scraps and things like that, you can make your own worm chow. So materials needed for your worm farm, you need some sort of bin, shredded cardboard, grit, and by grit I mean sand, dirt, vermiculite, or perlite. Water, typically unchlorinated water, so if you leave like a 5-gallon bucket full of water overnight or a couple days to get all those chlorinates out and fluorides and things like that. Some other things you can use, shredded paper, straw, leaves, leaf mold, coconut coir, peat moss, cover plants, and wood chips. If you're using the cover plants, you want to make sure that they're a healthy plant, not a diseased plant that you're pulling from your garden. Some containers you can use for your worm farming. This would be considered a traditional bin. And you can have as many of these as you like. I've seen it to where people will build like a stackable system and they'll just have a bunch of little different bins. Another system I have is, this one's a little bit too heavy for me to bring in, is this stackable bin, and I just got this off of Walmart.com, believe it or not. Wasn't that expensive, very cost effective, and it has 3 tiers that you can fill up all of your layers with each one having worms. So that's another great resource.
What's it made out of? The one you just talked about?
The bin,
The other one, yeah.
the stackable bin, it's just like a hard plastic.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's 3 just like little stackable hard plastic bins, but they stack on top of each other. It's meant to be for like your kitchen, if you want to keep it in your kitchen, or if you live in an apartment, someplace small, because it's very compact and easy to work with. And actually, at first I was against it, because I was like, this is not enough, I want more. But at the end, it's very easy to harvest, because you can harvest 1 layer at a time. So it makes it nice. We went over grit, so grit is sand, dirt, vermiculite, and perlite. And I have those today to show you guys how I'm going to set up this worm bin. Your greens are going to be your healthy garden clippings, grass clippings, fruits and vegetable scraps, and peels. Your browns are going to be leaves, shredded cardboard, paper, packing paper, and newspaper. So some things to think about when you're setting up your worm farm is where you're going to keep it. You want to make sure that it's out of direct sunlight. You want to make sure that it has good airflow. You want to make sure that your temperature is not killing your worms. So, for instance, when I first got my worms, I had 3 bins set up, and I actually started a worm farm in a 5-gallon bucket. And you would think, great, it's going to work, easy. Well, I had it on the front porch, and it got too hot, and I cooked all my worms. So you got to make sure that it's not in a super sunny or hot spot. So where I keep my worms in my house is going to be my garage, and I keep it on an interior wall because they're a little bit cooler than an exterior wall would be. And they're doing great. They're surviving, they're thriving, and it works. If you're in like cooler temperatures or when it gets cold in the wintertime, you want to make sure that you're aware of where your worm bin is. You don't want it to freeze because you can kill all of your worms. You want to definitely insulate it, and by insulating it, you can like wet layers of like leaves or grass clippings and kind of layer it in your worm bin. Keep it somewhere where it's not going to be completely frozen. And then warmer temperatures, so like we live in Texas, it gets super hot here. What you can do, what I like to do, is you can freeze water bottles and you can add those to your worm bin, just like the tops. Or what you can do is freeze your food scraps, which is another great way to keep your worms hydrated, fed, and cool. So you would freeze all your worm scraps, your food scraps, and then put those in the worm bin. Okay, so layering your worm farm. This is where I'm going to show you how I layer my worm farm. I actually took a course with Natalie, Hey It's a Good Life, and I do have little QR codes up here for you guys to scan. She gave me a discount code for you guys so you can get it at a cheaper price than what I paid for it. But it goes through everything in here. And this right here, I flip to it, this is the page that I reference the most. And it's got your layers on how you're going to layer your worm farm. So I like to start with some sort of paper bag, cardboard, something like that. That'll go on your bottom. And then in between each layer, you want to make sure you water it. You want to make sure that your worm farm is moist. You don't want a dry worm farm. Worms do not like a dry environment. So you can use your unchlorinated water, you can use a little pump sprayer, you can use a hand sprayer, whatever you got on hand, watering can, whatever. So you just want to add a little bit of water, and then you want to start from the bottom here. So you're going to put your browns. Your browns are going to be like your shredded cardboard, your shredded paper, your leaves, things like that. So you'll just put a layer of that and make sure that you water it in between. Do y'all have any questions yet? So let's go over what to feed your worm farm. So we're going to continue with this. So after the browns, you want to add your compost. Now when you're feeding your worms, you want to make sure that you're feeding them healthy stuff. You don't want to feed them candy, you don't want to feed them sugar, you don't want to feed them dairy or bones. I have a list on there on that handout that you guys can reference. So your greens, your fruits, your peels, typically no citrus, although I have put a couple of like those little cutie rinds in there, and they've been okay. I just don't like to use a lot of them. You want to stick to like healthy stuff, like I have on here. So like your bananas, your old avocados, anything that you're cooking with that you can put in there to feed them. Things you don't want to feed your worms: potatoes, citrus, onion, animal feces, grass, fat, oil, foods, dairy, salt, and processed foods.
Did you say grass or grease?
Grease, sorry.
The starch of potatoes that we come with?
I'm sorry?
Is it the starch of the potatoes that we come with and starch?
So from what I understand is that I think it's like mostly all of it, like even the peel and everything that's in it. It's just not good for them. Like you don't want to feed them like the nightshades either, like tomatoes and stuff, just because I think they have some sort of chemical in it. That's what I'm understanding. That's just not good for them. So after you put your compost, then you're gonna put your grit. I've got some perlite here, and I have some seed starting mix that I left out that wasn't sealed and I got dry. You can also use that. So just use what you have around your house to keep it cost effective. And the grit is just to help them digest their food because they do have a gizzard. Okay, so how do you feed your worms? Ideally, you want food scraps like we talked about. You can blend them, you can chop them, you can make them smaller. You can put the whole banana peel in there. Just make sure you peel off any stickers or anything like that. Also, when you're using cardboard, you don't want to have a bunch of labels. And if they have like a colored cardboard, like sometimes the chewy boxes are all like colored in blue, you don't want to use those in your worm farm because of the chemicals and everything that's in that. You want to keep it as natural as possible. So depending on the size of your worm farm and what you're trying to achieve, my rule of thumb is to feed them once a week. It's easy to remember. If you have like a galvanized bucket in your kitchen that you can keep your food scraps in, that's kind of what I do. Is I'll put everything in there, and when I'm ready to feed my worms, I just pull from there. It's okay if it's got mold. It's okay if it's stinky. You know, the more decomposed, the better. It helps them to digest it easier.
So mold is okay?
Yeah. Yeah. It'll get gross, but that's good. It's just adding that life in. Okay, so you can add your food scraps a couple of different ways. So they have this thing called like top feeding, and one that I'm going to reference is Captain Matt's Worm People. If you go to his YouTube, he's got a lot of videos out there, but he top feeds his worm. He has a big flow-through bin system. It's basically like the size of this table, and he's got all of his worms on there, and he feeds them all on the top, and he covers it with this big black like plastic, and they all feed on the very, very top. I don't have a worm farm that's that big, so I pocket feed. Pocket feeding is just how it sounds. You would pull some back, and then you would drop your food scraps, and then cover it back up. So one thing to remember is after you feed it, to cover with browns. So usually I like to keep some leaves on top of my worm bin. That way whenever I pocket feed, I can easily just cover it back up with the leaves or mulch that's been broken down, things like that. Your worm bin should not be smelly, should not smell bad in any way. It should smell very earthy, very rich. It should be dark in color. If it's not, and you don't feed them or you don't keep it moist enough, your worms will escape. They will climb out of your worm bin and they will try to escape and they will die off because they cannot survive. So just make sure you keep an eye on that. Typically, whenever you're feeding once a week, you're double checking the moisture level of it. That's a good way to remember it. Okay, so when and how to harvest your worm farm. So I like to harvest, like I said, my compost, my worm compost, and my worm castings. So my handy dandy husband built me this sieve here, and this is just metal that we've gotten from Lowe's. It's 8-inch. And whenever I do it, I usually put it on a bucket like this, and I'll take a scoop out of my worm farm that's ready to go. And how I know it's ready to go is it's black, it's rich in color, it's very dark, it's very earthy, it's very, smells great, smells like good compost. What also I'm looking for is things that are broken down. So not a lot of whole leaves, not a lot of whole mulch. You don't want to see whole, like, shredded paper. You want to make sure that most of that is gone at this point, and that they've eaten their food scraps. So I will take a handful of that and I will put it in my sieve and I will work through it. And everything that falls through is worm castings. And I have some today if y'all are interested in feeling them. They feel amazing. They don't stick to your hands. It's crazy. It's super light and super fluffy. And you can just add it to anything, any plants that you have. And depending on how much you want, if you want to harvest your whole worm farm or if you just want to harvest part of your worm farm, you can do that too. I harvested some worm castings that I have up here for sale, $2 a bag, out of just 2 of my layers of my worm farm. And it wasn't even that ready. It wasn't as ready as I would like it to be, but I still got all of that out of it. So that's what's great about worm farming. It's really catered to what you need. So everything that's left in this sieve that doesn't fall through is now considered your worm compost. And you can add that into your garden, you can add that into your compost bin, you can add it to your plants, wherever you need it.
So then at the top of that is going to be like whole pieces of leaves and the worms themselves, and then you just throw that back in?
Yes. So what I like to do is when I take that handful out, before I put it in the sieve, if I really want to, you can lay it out on a table, which kind of brings me to my next point is what you need, like materials, your table, your bins, your buckets, your rake, your sieve. So you can put all of that on the table, right? And you can start picking out all of your whole leaves, you can pick out all of your worms, all of the big chunks of stuff that haven't decomposed yet, and pull that aside into like another bucket, and that'll go back into your worm farm when you reset it. So it's really great, and it's easy. And you know what? The kids like it too. My kids love it. They love digging for worms and finding them, and it just makes it that much more fun. So it's really for everybody, super easy. So making your worm tea. I have how I make my worm tea on this handout here. It's kind of like a 2-day process for me. But I'm coming to find out that you can add stuff to your worm tea to make it a quicker process. I usually I fill up a 5-gallon bucket with water and I let that sit for a couple days to get all of the chlorine out and the fluorine and all of that. And then I will start adding stuff to it. So you want to take like a part of that worm tea, or water, and then you would add 2 tablespoons of unsulfured black molasses into that and mix it up super, super good. You also want to get an aerator, like a bubbler, like a fish tank bubbler, and you want to bubble your water for at least 24 hours. So then you would add your molasses mixture in there and you would mix it all up really good. Then you would add all of your castings and you would actually let that sit for another 24 hours. So it's kind of a process, but at the end of it, you can bottle it. You can directly spray it on stuff. It does have a shelf life. I wouldn't let it sit too long. The quicker you use it, the better. If it starts to stink really bad, it's probably not good anymore. But you want to saturate your soil with that and your plants.
What is the bubbling part for?
Just add that oxygen back into it. So when you're putting your castings in there, the molasses is actually feeding the microorganisms that are in there. And the microorganisms is what actually is decomposing everything that you have, making that compost. And the worms will feed off of the microorganisms. So it's kind of a whole process. Everything depends on each other.
If you have well water, do you still let it sit?
No.
Okay.
city water, so I have to let it bubble and aerate for 24 hours to get all that stuff out. So some resources I have, like I said, Hey, It's a Good Life. Natalie, she's got a whole worm course. She literally takes you through everything. She's got handouts. It's actually really good for homeschool, if y'all are into homeschool. She's got a bunch of coloring pages, workbook pages, the whole nine. And I do have, like I said, a discount code for you guys. Mimi's Worms is another great resource. Uncle Jim's Worms and Captain Nat's Worm People. Like I said, they've got a lot of YouTube videos out there. And I also wanted to reference the book. This is a great book. I just got this off of Amazon. It's up here for you guys to look at it if you want to look at it. But yeah, so we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. And thank you so much for letting me present today. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. If you want to come touch anything, come over here.
Where did you get your shredded cardboard?
Okay, so funny story. So we bought a shredder off of Amazon, a pretty cheap one. And I give my husband this task. So he'll sit down in the shop and he'll shred cardboard for me. Him and the kids will just shred it. So that's all I use. Yeah, it's pretty great. And all the packing paper that comes in like the Amazon boxes, you can use that too. So anything that, it's most of the stuff you're gonna have on hand. The leaves are gonna be in your yard when the trees are falling. You know, just save them. Put them in those lawn bags and just put them aside and use those. The grass clippings, just bag your grass clippings whenever you cut your lawn. The paper, you're already ordering stuff from Amazon or wherever else you're ordering stuff from, and you can use the cardboard or the packing paper or anything like that. So it's really great. It's really cost effective, and it definitely can benefit your garden in some ways.
Alright, so the night crawlers, it says on they like to burrow in like manure, or whatever manure.
Yeah.
I'm assuming not dogs and all that stuff.
No.
So couldn't you put that in your compost at all, or no? Or not compost, but in your bin?
Worms that you find.
Or just
Out?
No, just the manure, like if you had like I have horses. So we put like a rake of
You
horses.
could, depending on how big your worm farm is. On a small scale like this, I probably wouldn't use a whole bunch, but if you had like a bigger bin and you wanted to add that manure to it, sure, you could add some, for sure.
What you need to do is make sure that it's dry, and when you pick it up, you can throw it in.
Right.
Okay.
So manure that's already been kind of broken down for you. Yes.
I have kind of a technical question. On the plastic, since it's made with petrochemicals, are there more natural ways to do this so that you're not using plastic? Because I mean, the worms are, if it heats up, you're gonna get that in your dirt, and then it's gonna go into your plants, and then you're going to eat.
Right.
So do they have, that's why I was asking about the other stackable bin, is would there be a way to build your own bin?
You know, I don't know what that's made of, but because it's made for worms, I mean, I would think that it wouldn't have those kind of chemicals, but you never know, I guess it could.
Because all plastic is finished.
Like even food grade and stuff?
It can, yes, it can still leach.
Okay.
That's what
Yeah.
I was wondering, I mean.
Right, so the flow through system is made out of your wood.
Okay.
And like, well, I mean, it's got PVC on the bottom, because that's where you would rake everything out. Basically, with worms, they'll start to eat everything, and then all their castings will fall to the bottom, and then you'll rake it from the bottom to get that harvest. So you're gonna have the wood and the PVC really is all you're gonna use. So you could make shift your own worm farm, absolutely. Another way to do that is like free-range worms, which is kind of crazy. I don't know how you would harvest it, but I have heard of it. So basically, you would section off a piece of garden, like a raised bed, and you would use that as your worm farm, free-range worms. So you can really tailor it to each individual.
You can probably also lay cardboard boxes inside each other. They're gonna eat through it, so you have to be careful. But you could probably do that.
With the dye, and this is something I just wondered, because I use cardboard boxes in my raised garden too, and I've always wondered, like, the dye's not gonna harm the worms or anything like that.
It's not the best. What I've heard is some of them are okay, definitely not red, but try to avoid it.
Yeah, I wouldn't use like the heavy dye, like the chewy boxes, they come all blue. I wish they wouldn't do that, because then you can't really do anything with it at that point. You know, you can recycle it, I suppose, but you don't want to use it like in your garden or, you know, in your compost bins. So.
And along those lines, none of the shiny gloss.
No. So like, another thing I've heard is people use like envelopes, right? You get a lot of mail in all your envelopes, but you don't want to use that clear sleeve that's in it. You want to pull that off and then shred just the paper part. So
And the tape on that comes on the boxes?
I always pull my tape off. Make sure you pull your tape off. Anything that's glossy or plastic that cannot be easily broken down, I will pull off.
What about like newspaper, because they have a lot of ink on that.
From what I understand, you can use newspaper. And I don't get newspaper because I don't read the newspaper, but from what I understand, you can use newspaper.
Do you have to split up your farms at some point? Like, I'm assuming earthworms reproduce.
Great question. So they will actually, if they get overcrowded, so like say I have this worm bin today, I'm fixing to add about 25 to 30 worms into this bin. If they think that's too many, they won't reproduce. They'll very much slow down that process. So a lot of people will have like breeder buckets, and they'll have a bunch of different buckets going at a time, so that way they can get more out of their worms, and then separate them. But you do not have to. Like I have 2 buckets. I have a Purina bucket, and then I have that stackable worm bin. And I have not separated or split them, other than for this presentation.
Just keep an eye on like when they escape, kind of as you check if you have no worms or you have few worms.
Yeah, so
something's wrong.
when you pocket feed or you pull your soil away to feed, you should be seeing some worms in there. They're going to be mostly at the top there. They will go up and down. Mostly the European night crawlers, which are red wigglers, typically stay at the top. So when you pocket feed, you want to check for your moisture if there's any worms in there. If there's not, and you see a lot of dead worms out, then you know you've got a problem. Either it's not wet enough, it's too wet, or you're not feeding them enough.
How often should you harvest?
So that is going to depend on what you need. But if you want to just base it off of your worm farm, what you're looking for is that dark, rich, earthy look and smell. Typically, I will harvest my big worm farm maybe once every 3 months. And then my smaller ones, depending on how they're looking, if they're really active and it's getting really decomposed and everything, I can either harvest by layer or I can just harvest the whole thing maybe once every month and a half. But like I said, for this presentation, they weren't exactly ready to harvest, but I harvested what I could and I still got quite a bit.
And how old were they? Months? Or how
Um,
soon is that?
That one I would say was probably right at a month.
Okay.
Yes. But I really would have liked it to go a little bit longer. But I reset it and they will be good and they're happy, healthy worms.
So you said red wigglers are pretty common. Do you always purchase them, or do you ever like? I've seen my kids like they run out and they'll like collect the worms. Is there a difference between what you purchase and what you collect?
So from what I understand, it's not great to just go pick worms out of your yard and then put them in to like a controlled habitat. Same thing with like animals, right? We don't want to go collect, a random animal and then try to make it house, make it house. It's the same thing with worms. They're not going to know what to do. It's what they're born to do, but like, there's a difference between composting worms and worms you find in your garden. If I was to advise you in any way, I would say to get composting worms, not just go get worms out of your garden. But you can do your own experiment. So by all means, grow messy and do it yourself and see what works. Because that's how we're gonna grow, that's how we're gonna know, we learn from our failures and our successes.
So talking about the harvesting part of it, I think it will also depend on how small you make the items. Because you can blend it and pour it in there, and then they'll blend it a lot faster.
Okay.
But if you're putting like whole banana peels or, those kinds of things, it's gonna take them a little bit longer to go through and process.
Definitely. I'm gonna finish filling up this worm.
So after you harvest it, like, should you kind of leave a little bit in there, or do you just go ahead and harvest the whole thing and just buy worms, or just leave it?
Oh, no.
Or a third, or?
You wanna reuse your worms.
Okay.
You wanna pull out all your worms and use that to reset your worm bin. So you'll keep the same worms year after year. Yes, they'll just keep reproducing depending on how many you have or how many you cut off. They will just continue to reproduce and how big your business.
So when you buy them, like off of the feeding places or the worms,
Huh?
do you get like just a little bit, like 10 or 20? Like, what do you recommend for a beginner?
I think that they have different amounts on there. I think it's all depending on what you want to start with. I don't remember how many we started with, maybe 50? Oh, she got the Uncle Jim's worms. There you go.
So
Yeah.
I order from Uncle Jim's, it used to be Uncle just worms, and they were having a sale. I think these are 1,000 worms. But I think the lowest amount they have is maybe 250, or maybe that's the European worms.
Yeah, we got both the European night crawlers and the red wigglers. And we got them from Mimi's, but it's been a while. I mean, I've had these worms now for probably 2 years.
Okay.
So it's been a minute. I don't know. That's a good question. But I mean, as much as they reproduce, I mean, when you're harvesting and you pull all that stuff out, you can see the little teeny tiny baby worms, and they have little cocoons. They look like a little yellow bee, and they're kind of golden in color. And that's where your egg sack's going to be. And there's probably like, I don't know how many worms in that little egg sack. So quite a few. They're constantly reproducing. So. I'm sorry? 4 to 8 years. So yeah, quite a while.
So if I can understand, so you're primarily harvesting the castings, and then the compost that's left, are you using it back in the worm farm, or are you
Yes.
starting completely all over?
So I use my worm compost to reset my next bin.
Okay.
Just because I feel like it's already a part of it and they already have a good start.
Right.
Instead of getting like compost from the store. But if you have enough of it, sure, you can use it to reset your worm bin and you can use it into your garden, wherever you need it.
So how do you know, like, okay, they have reproduced so much, it's time for us to expand?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't really had that issue.
Okay.
When I harvest, there's a lot of worms in there. And usually they're all balled up with the food scraps and stuff. They get real active and crazy, but you can definitely see them. I haven't ever split them up. I just let them do their thing. But you could absolutely start splitting them, and that would be considered like a breeder bucket. If you wanted to have, like, maybe you wanted to sell your castings, or do it on a larger scale, you could absolutely make several worm farms and have breeder buckets.
How many worm farms do you have now?
I have 2, but I'm in the process of building a flow-through worm farm. So I'm super excited about that. We're gonna see how that goes. We've got the wood for it. We just need to figure out the design and where to put it, because we're limited on space where I feel comfortable putting them. I don't want to put them in the shop because it gets too hot. I mean, it's insulated, but it's not climate controlled. So it's gonna have to go in the garage where my current worms are sitting now. And I just have a little bit of space. But we're gonna roll with it. We're gonna have a big worm bin, and hopefully one day I'll be selling the worm tea and the castings on a larger scale. That's the goal.
Any other questions for Danielle? Thank you again, Danielle, so much for coming and talking to us about worm farming. We are going to have a hands-on demonstration to create small worm farms with Dawn Wilbert, our director. So she's going to take over and show y'all exactly how that can be done. And we do still have the raffle and
Yes. If
eggs.
you want to do the raffle, we can draw after that, and we can see who wins the worm farm. Who's going to take home a bunch of worms today?
So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dawn.
So first I wanted to just agree with everything she said, because I do the pocket feeding, and my husband built me a little screen to screen up, and
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. Now, like for the grit, you can use a little bit of soil, I think, but the eggshells they really like also. And the eggshells have the calcium in them, so
Right.
that'll be good for your garden, but they don't break down, really.
So I have a question on that, actually.
Okay.
So my last presentation that I did, that was a question that I brought up. Can you use your eggshells? Because you can use your eggshells to feed back to your chickens. You can put them in the garden, anywhere you want to add calcium. Now you can't feed them to the worms, is what I'm understanding. But the debate is, do you have to wash them out?
Okay, so if you wash them out, they will dry faster and you can crush them up easier. But I don't think you do.
I wouldn't.
I typically do rinse them out,
So
but
I'm on the other end. So
Yeah.
I have this little crock that sits next to like my stove, and I have like a potato masher in there. And every time I use or crack an egg, and I'll put my eggshell in there, and then I'll smash them up after they've dried. And I usually give that back to my chickens, or I'll sprinkle it in my garden. But I haven't ever attempted giving it to worms. But I'm
Yes.
curious. Yes.
so you can actually soak them and water your plants with them. And
Okay.
they love that.
Okay.
So, but I will put an eggshell in my worms, and then you go back later and they're all curled up in there.
Oh, really?
So they love it. And the avocados, they do the same
The
thing.
avocados thing. And you can put the whole avocado.
Yeah, see, I'm just putting half, cause but you put the whole
With the
thing.
seed, the
Oh,
peel,
yes.
the inside, I've had it sprout in there.
Me
But
too.
you just let it set and they love it.
Yeah.
It's like one of their favorite things.
Yes. So I have, if you brought a plastic container today, you can use that. I do have some other plastic containers, and what we're gonna do is just basically layer like she talked about. I don't have all of the supplies that she does. I have some peat moss, and we have the newspaper that we have shredded, and then we've got just some few food scraps that you can layer. So this will be something that you can take home with you. The kids will love it. So we're going to put a piece of black paper around it because they like it to be dark. And then periodically, if you want to watch the worms, you pull that up and they'll be around the outside of it and you'll be able to see them. So if you want to come over here, I don't have enough for everybody. If you want the kids to do it or if you want to do it, come on over and we can start.